When people talk about a socialist policy that goes against church power, it is clear they do not mean to attack a person's own religious beliefs. The common religion of most people will only completely vanish in today's society when people stop being controlled by society and instead take charge of it and guide it on purpose. This idea becomes less strong as more people, who learn about socialism, start to understand how society grows and changes. When we say that religion is a private affair, it means that we should stay neutral and not get involved in personal matters of belief and heart. But this rule has another meaning. It is not only a guide for how socialists should act, it is also a call to the government. In the name of freedom of conscience, we demand that all special benefits given to believers that hurt non-believers be ended, and we will fight any effort by the Church to become the ruling power in the state. This is not just about personal belief, but about politics, so socialist parties in different countries may use different plans depending on their situation. Germany and France have chosen very different policies. In Germany, the Social Democracy did not join the Kulturkampf of 1870 and 1880, and it often works to bring back the Jesuits. But our party does not spend much effort in saying that religion is a private matter, or in asking to stop public money from going to church causes. In government meetings, we always vote against giving money for church causes, yet we do not make a big fuss about it in our meetings, in newspapers, or in parliament. German social democracy is very moderate, not only about religious opinions, but also about church politics, just as there is not much talk about Republican ideas, even though every socialist is naturally a Republican. You cannot see these same tactics in France when it comes to church matters. It is true that the situation is completely different in the two countries. In Germany, most church leaders are Protestants, but in France they are Catholics. There are Catholics in Germany, but they are not the majority, and 10 years ago they were treated badly. The Kulturkampf, led by Bismarck, made socialists and Catholics join together, because they were both attacked by unfair laws. But now things are the other way around, and the Ultramontanes are in power. They have done this as a political group, not as a church. Therefore, social democracy can attack them not for their faith, but because they are parliamentary representatives who support taxes on food, militarism, and imperialism. The main difference comes from the type of government. No matter how strong the church's influence is on public life, its role is very different when it happens in a kingdom compared to a republic. In a kingdom, the church, which has ideas like a king, becomes part of the state without breaking its balance. In this way, it does not act as a separate political force. But the kingdom, which gets its power from the same source as the church, power that comes from heaven, can take control of the church more easily if it starts to meddle in public life. And no matter how gentle and obedient the Protestant church leaders may be, it is clear that a few years ago the German emperor had to say, on a small occasion, that he would not let the church leaders take part in politics. In Italy, there is a fight between the Quirinal and the Vatican. This might seem to go against what we just said, but here it is not really a fight between the kingdom and the church. Instead, it is a fight between two leaders, one who still rules and one who has lost his power. Russia gives us another clear example of how the church, even if it looks different, still supports the government of a kingdom. For these same reasons, when the church is seen as a part of public opinion, it first seems to break apart the unity in Republican France. The church naturally opposes the main ideas of the republic, where every part of the government is chosen by elections and the people hold the power. The church went against the middle-class ideas of a government without church control. It was led by its own spirit and by its personal ties with the rich, which made it seem like a leftover from the time of kings. Because of this, it naturally tried to act as its own political force and became an enemy of the republic. The fight against the church's power is like a red thread that runs through the history of the middle-class republic in France. While the Church slowly takes over the schools to use them against the Republic grows tired from trying to fight this opposition and from the many problems that come with it. In France, the Church and the Army act in many similar ways. More than a year ago, we wrote these words in the Newsite about the Dreyfus case and the socialist crisis. The Third Republic has grown into a very good example of a middle-class government, but it has also developed its own problems. One big problem comes from the fact that this republic is built on the power of a middle-class parliament and a large regular army that is used to carry out colonial and imperial plans. In a strong kingdom, the army, with its strict way of working, is just a quiet tool for the ruler. But in a republic, the army starts to act like a power of its own. It is only weakly connected to the other parts of the government, which in a parliamentary republic is run by regular people who change often. Their top leader might be someone who used to work with leather, or a very good-speaking lawyer. French society has changed so much because the middle class followed its own interests. Now the middle class is split into small groups that care only about themselves, using the government and parliament for their own benefit. At the same time, the army has become independent. Instead of just following the orders of the government, it now has its own goals and is ready to protect its rights, without thinking of the republic, even if that means going against it. The fight between the parliamentary republic and the regular army can only be fixed if the army goes back to being part of the people, and if the people organize themselves like an army. The army should no longer be used for colonial fights, but only for protecting the country. In short, the regular army should be replaced by a militia made up of citizens. Until this happens, the problems inside the government will keep showing up as crises and fights between the republic and its own army. These struggles show that the army is independent, corrupt, and lacking discipline. The Wilson case, the Panama scandal, and the Southern Railway scandals were similar to the Dreyfus case. The way the army and the church act toward the republic is very much alike. This similarity has made these two forces come together, and has given a kingly look to all the later political problems in France. Every time these two parts of the government join together in protest, it changes the whole picture. Just as the problem between the army and the republic can only be fixed by changing the regular army into a militia, the problem between the Catholic Church and the republic will only go away when the church stops being a public part of the government and becomes a private organization. This means that the church must be separated from the state, its priests must be removed from schools and the army, and the property owned by religious groups must be taken away. Social democracy does not ask for only part of capitalist property to be taken by the middle-class government, but that is not because it is against such takings. When we call for industries, like the railways, to be run by society, we should not mind if this change happens simply by taking the property away. We do not only ask for the state to take over an industry, because having the government run, it would not change the basic nature of capitalist property, and might even make a conservative government stronger. Even when this worry is not true, as in Switzerland, such a demand to a middle-class government is really an impossible dream. However, social democracy is even more right to demand that the middle-class state end old ways of property ownership. The dead hand is one example. All the jobs that the dead hand used to do, taking care of the poor, the sick, and running schools, now belong to the modern state. But property owned by the church, which is now free from that duty, is just a leftover from feudal times in middle-class society. Any revolution that truly cares about its duties should take away the church's property. In France, the socialists, when asking for this, also demanded a non-religious education, and pushed the middle-class Republicans to follow these ideas. If the French Friends wanted to use the same methods as the Germans, which were used in other situations, and if they chose not to join the political fight that has lasted for the past 30 years between the Republic and the Church, if they said that these fights did not matter to them, they would be hurting themselves and would not have any real influence in politics. The socialists must fight against the church, because it is a power that is against the republic and stuck in old ways, not just to join the middle class in hating the church, but to completely remove it. For the past 10 years, there has been constant guerrilla warfare against the priests. French middle-class Republicans see this as one of the best ways to distract the working class from social issues and weaken the class struggle. The dislike of the church is also the only reason the Radical Party exists. The changes over the last 30 years and the rise of socialism have made that party's program useless. For the middle-class parties, fighting against the state is not just a way to get something else done, it is an end in itself. They fight in a way that never reaches its goal, believing that it will continue forever and become a permanent part of politics. What we have just said shows that socialists should not be satisfied with following the middle-class anti-church crowd. They are their enemies and must be exposed in the war against the church. What makes the socialist goal of fighting the church different from that of the middle class is not only how far they are willing to go and how determined they are, but also the very starting point, which is quite different. The purposely hopeless campaign that middle-class Republicans have fought against the church for the past 30 years has a special quality. They break the issue into two separate questions, even though politically it is one single problem. They claim that the secular clergy and the regular clergy are different and try to ignore the religious orders, even though it is hard, because they do not see that the real issue is the separation of church and state. Instead of solving the problem all at once by stopping the budget for public worship, taking away all the administrative roles given to the clergy, and seizing the wealth of the religious orders, they only attack the unauthorized orders. Instead of keeping the church separate from the state, they try instead to join the religious orders with the state. Even though it appears that they are taking the schools away from the religious orders, no real blow is struck against the church, because it is still seen as part of the state. The way the Waldeck-Rousseau ministry acted is a typical example of this. So it is wrong to say that these weak, anti-church actions by the radical ministries and the parliamentary majority are the start of big changes, or that they partly solve the problem. Instead, this empty fight against the orders only deflects the attack from the weakest spot and protects the main power of the church leaders. Therefore, the church carefully holds on to the favorite lie of middle-class Republicans, which is that there is a real conflict between the secular clergy and the regular clergy. The church shows this through obvious hostility. Thus, middle-class anti-clericalism actually makes the church stronger, just as middle-class anti-militarism, as seen in the Dreyfus affair, only dealt with parts that were already part of militarism. It merely cleaned up the corruption among the generals and ended up making the army stronger. The first duty of socialism is clearly to expose that policy at all times. To do this, it only needs to state its own full religious policy and show how different it is from the weak plans of the middle-class Republicans. But if the socialists joined in without speaking out against the poor excuses for fighting that the parliamentary radicals use, if they did not always say that these middle-class, priest-eaters, are above all the enemies of the working people, then the goal of Republican anti-church ideas would be reached, and the fight between classes would become twisted. Not only would the fight against the church's reaction be lost, but the danger from middle-class men and workers acting together would be even greater than the problems expected from the church's old-fashioned attacks. So, I believe the policy socialism should follow in France is this. It should not use the methods of German social democracy, or those of French radicals. It must attack and win over not only the backward forces of the anti-republican church, but also the fake nature of the middle-class anti-church views.